Marcus adjusted the collar of the old suit he had borrowed, trying his best to make it look presentable. The fabric felt stiff and unfamiliar against his skin, so unlike the worn work clothes he wore every day as the school janitor. He could still smell faint traces of bleach and cleaning solution on his hands, no matter how many times he had washed them. But none of that mattered tonight. What mattered was the small, delicate hand wrapped tightly around his fingers, his daughter Lily's hand. She was glowing with excitement, her eyes darting around in wonder as they stepped into the grand ballroom of the city's most prestigious charity gala. The chandelier overhead sparkled like 100 diamonds, casting light that danced across polished marble floors. Waiters in crisp black uniforms moved gracefully between tables draped in white linen, carrying silver trays of champagne and hors d'oeuvres Marcus couldn't even name. Men in tailored tuxedos and women in shimmering gowns gathered in glittering clusters, their voices rising in laughter and casual chatter. It was a world Marcus had never belonged to, a world that seemed so far from the squeak of his mop and the echo of his footsteps down empty school halls. Yet here he was, standing at the edge of it all, with Lily by his side. She looked up at him with wide eyes and whispered, "Daddy, it's like a fairy tale." Her dress wasn't new, but she wore it with a kind of pride and joy that made her shine brighter than anyone else in the room. He had found it in a thrift store 2 weeks earlier, after saving every spare dollar he could. The hem had been a little long, but Marcus had carefully stitched it shorter himself, pricking his fingers more times than he could count. When Lily tried it on and twirled in front of the cracked mirror in their small apartment, her face had lit up in a way that made all his tired days worthwhile. Tonight, he had promised her, she would feel like a princess. But as they walked deeper into the room, Marcus could feel the stares settling on them. He heard the low whispers that weren't nearly as discreet as the speakers thought. A woman in a sequined gown tilted her head toward her friend, her lips curling into a smile that wasn't kind. "Who brings a child to something like this?" she muttered. Another man, adjusting his cufflinks, chuckled softly, "That's the janitor from the school, isn't it? Look at him, thinking he belongs here." The laughter spread like wildfire, quiet, restrained, but cruel all the same. It wrapped around Marcus, pressing down on his chest. His ears burned, and for a moment, he wanted to turn back toward the doors they had just entered. He could take Lily home, away from the judgment and the polished perfection of people who would never understand what it cost him just to step into this room. But then he looked at her. Lily's eyes weren't on the people whispering, they were on the chandeliers, the music, the way the room seemed alive with sparkle and possibility. She wasn't hearing their laughter, she was hearing the violins playing softly in the corner. She wasn't seeing their sneers, she was seeing the dream he had promised her. Her small hand squeezed his, and in that moment Marcus stood a little straighter. He reminded himself why they had come. This gala was for the school fundraiser, and no matter how invisible people like him were, he believed in that cause. He believed in giving kids like Lily a chance at something brighter. He had spent years fixing broken desks, unclogging drains, painting over graffiti, all so the students could have a place they were proud of. He wasn't here to impress the wealthy donors or to fit in with the glittering crowd. He was here because this school mattered, and because Lily deserved to see her. Father is more than just the man who swept floors. Still, the laughter was hard to ignore. It clung to him, mocking every step he took. Marcus guided Lily toward an empty table at the side of the room, hoping to settle somewhere out of the spotlight. He could feel eyes on his back as he walked, the weight of their judgment heavy and cold. His heart ached, not for himself, but for Lily. He feared that at any moment she would notice the laughter, that her bright innocence would be dimmed by the cruelty of strangers. As they sat down, Lily leaned close and whispered, "Daddy, are we really allowed to be here?" Her voice wasn't doubtful, it was curious, as though she still couldn't quite believe this world was real. Marcus swallowed the lump in his throat and smiled. "Of course, sweetheart, we belong here just as much as anyone else." He wasn't sure if he believed his own words, but the way her face lit up when he said them made him glad he had. She picked up the sparkling water at her place setting and sipped it with both hands, pretending it was something fancier. Marcus couldn't help but smile at her delight. For her, the night was magical, untouched by the sharp edges of mockery around them. But as the music swelled and the crowd grew louder, Marcus felt the sting of isolation grow stronger. He was a janitor in a borrowed suit, sitting among people who lived in a different world entirely. He could feel the divide like a wall, and though he held his head high, part of him wondered if they would ever see him, or Lily, for who they truly were. Yet even in the weight of that moment, there was a quiet strength inside him. He had survived harder days than this, worked through exhaustion, swallowed his pride when life gave him no choice. Tonight was just another test, another reminder that dignity wasn't given by others, it was something you carried within. He didn't know what the night would bring, but as long as Lily's hand was in his, he knew he would endure it. Marcus sat stiffly at the small round table, trying to keep his posture steady even as he felt the sting of curious eyes all around. He had thought by now the whispers would fade, but they hadn't. Every time he lifted his gaze, he caught someone looking, quickly turning away with a smirk or a raised brow. He focused instead on Lily, who was happily tracing shapes in the condensation on her glass, oblivious to the judgment surrounding them. She giggled softly as the violinist shifted to a livelier tune, her feet swinging beneath her chair in rhythm. That giggle was the only thing keeping Marcus grounded, the only reminder that this night wasn't about the people laughing, it was about her. He was just about to suggest they step outside for some fresh air when the room suddenly shifted. The music softened, conversations grew hushed. Marcus noticed heads turning, faces lighting up with admiration, and all attention pivoted toward the entrance at the far side of the hall. The CEO of the sponsoring corporation, Richard Davenport, had arrived. Richard was the kind of man who seemed to fill every room he entered. Tall, sharply dressed, with an aura of quiet authority, he moved with purpose. The crowd parted instinctively, people eager to greet him, shake his hand, be seen at his side. He exchanged nods and smiles, but his eyes were scanning the room, searching for something, or someone. Marcus lowered his gaze quickly, hoping to go unnoticed. The last thing he wanted was attention, especially from someone like Davenport, who existed in a world Marcus had only ever glimpsed from a distance. He adjusted his chair slightly, angling himself away, pretending to study the silverware at the table. But then, unexpectedly, Davenport began walking directly toward him. The crowd quieted. Further, confusion rippling as people tried to guess his destination. Marcus felt his stomach tighten. He told himself it was coincidence, that the CEO would stop at one of the wealthier donors seated nearby. But he didn't. His polished shoes clicked against the marble until he stood directly before Marcus and Lily's table. "Marcus," Davenport said warmly, his voice carrying easily through the hushed room. Marcus blinked, stunned. He hadn't even known the man remembered his name. Slowly, awkwardly, he rose to his feet. "Mr. Davenport," he managed, his voice low and rough. Lily looked between them curiously, her small hand still resting on her father's arm. Davenport smiled, not at Marcus's suit or his discomfort, but at the man himself. He placed a steady hand on Marcus's shoulder and then turned to face the crowd. "I want everyone here tonight to take a good look," he began, his tone commanding but not harsh. The room stilled completely, every eye fixed on him. "This man standing beside me has done more for our school than most of us combined." A ripple of surprise spread through the guests. Some shifted uncomfortably, others frowned in confusion. Marcus's face burned, but Davenport's voice pressed on with unwavering conviction. "You may know Marcus as the janitor. The man who sweeps floors, fixes leaks, and makes sure the lights are working. But what you don't know is the countless ways he has been a mentor, a guardian, and a quiet hero to the children who walk those halls every day." Marcus's chest tightened. He wanted to protest, to insist he was just doing his job, but the CEO's words wouldn't let him. "My own son," Davenport continued, his voice catching slightly with emotion, "came home one day after being bullied. He didn't come to me first. He went to Marcus, and Marcus sat with him, listened, and gave him the strength to face another day. He has done that not only for my child, but for countless others. He has been the steady, unseen force that keeps our children safe, cared for, and seen, even when we, as parents, were too busy to notice." The silence was heavy now, but it was no longer mocking. It was reverent, almost ashamed. The same people who had laughed minutes earlier now found themselves staring at Marcus with new eyes. Davenport raised his glass high. "Tonight, while we raise funds for the future of our school, let us also honor the man who has given so much of himself to that future. Not for recognition, not for applause, but out of love, out of dignity, out of selflessness, to Marcus, and to the heart of what it truly means to serve others. Applause erupted, loud and genuine, rolling across the room in waves. Some people even rose to their feet, clapping with an energy that seemed to cleanse the space of the cruelty that had lingered there before. Marcus's eyes filled with tears. He tried to blink away. He looked down at Lily, who was clapping too, her face glowing with pride. "Daddy," she whispered excitedly, "he's talking about you." Marcus knelt beside her, pulling her into his arms, overwhelmed by the swell of emotions crashing through him. For years, he had believed his work went unnoticed, that he was invisible except for when something broke or needed cleaning. But in this moment, standing with the CEO's hand on his shoulder and the room applauding, he realized something deeper. He had never been invisible to the ones who truly mattered. When he straightened, Davenport leaned close and said softly, "You belong here, Marcus." "Never doubt that again." Marcus nodded, unable to find words, his throat thick with gratitude. Around him, faces that had once sneered now looked at him with respect, even admiration. But he didn't need their approval anymore. He already had what mattered most, the pride shining in his daughter's eyes, the affirmation that his quiet sacrifices had not gone unnoticed, and the reminder that dignity was never about suits or status. As the applause slowly faded and the evening carried on, Marcus sat back down with Lily, her small hand once again in his. For the first time in a long time, he felt seen, not as the janitor, but as a father, a man, and a human being whose worth was far greater than anyone had imagined.